Hello, and we are going to begin with a preview of cellular respiration. So we are actually picking up where we left off with Roman numeral 1, our introduction to cellular respiration. This is big letter C under that. So this is a preview of cellular respiration. What in the world do I mean by that? I'm giving you the big picture overview of how cellular respiration works within the mitochondria. So remember, this is the organelle that we're going to love in this section right now because there's so much going on inside the mitochondria. I want you to picture that, well, I'm going to draw a huge mitochondria on the board for you right now. So big letter C, preview of cellular respiration. And remember that the mitochondria has like two membranes. You got an outer membrane and an inner membrane. So let's label this really quickly just so you can have that background. I'm going to put it over here. So you have an outer membrane and you have an inner membrane. And inside here you have, actually I'm running out of space. You have the matrix, and in between you have the inner membrane space. So just bring you back to where we were from our last unit with organelles in the cell. So remember that these membranes, both of them are made of phospholipid bilayer, and within these membranes, just like our cell membrane in the organelles, you have proteins. I'm sure there's cholesterol and everything like that in there as well, but proteins are really abundant within this membrane. So, excuse me. So outside of the mitochondria, you have the cytosol. So pretend this whole big space that you can't see around my whiteboard, we're in a cell right now. And this part right here, all around it, is the cytosol. So the preview of cellular respiration, here's what I want you to know. There are three main sets of reactions that occur to do that overall reaction that we learned about last time. The 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 oxygen will give you 6 CO2 and 6 waters and 38 ATPs. That is a condensed version of what we're doing. We're now going to break that apart into 3 distinct portions of cellular respiration. This is the catabolic pathway we were talking about before. So the first part of cellular respiration is called glycolysis. So glycolysis isn't happening in the mitochondria. It's actually happening in the cytosol. And what glycolysis is, if you're looking at this word well enough and you're remembering words that we learned about last time, lysis, remember, that means break. And in this case, we are literally breaking glucose in half. So glucose is going to get broken in half. You're going to get glucose. It's going to get broken into something called pyruvate. I'm actually going to make 2 of those, but we're going to worry about that later. Glucose gets made into pyruvate, and here's what happens. So that's step 1. This actually takes a lot of steps. We're going to summarize it. All of these things we're going to summarize. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty steps of how this all works, that's when you take college level biochemistry. So you don't need to do that now for the high school level. But I don't want to spare you the details because that's where it's kind of fun. What happens is, once glycolysis happens, glucose and pyruvate, you're going to make a little bit of ATP. Nothing too much, just a tiny bit, nothing big. And during this time, you're also going to make some NADH. So remember, these are our electron carriers. So NAD plus came into the mix here, scooped up a couple of electrons, became NADH, and during this time, it made some NADH. NADH is going to go to work later, but right now it's just climbing up that ladder to get up the slide. So NADH also gets made. So we'll just kind of keep NADH here, ATP here. These are things that get made during glycolysis. Pyruvate. Now that pyruvate's made, it's going to enter into the matrix. And once it enters into the matrix, it goes through this cycle. And there's a couple different names for the cycle. There's the citric acid cycle, or there's Krebs cycle. You could use either term. They're both specific. A scientist with the last name Krebs discovered this, and so therefore it's called the Krebs cycle. It's also called the citric acid cycle because during this portion, you make a little bit of citric acid. So I'm used to saying citric acid cycle. Some are used to saying Krebs cycle. Same thing. So this would be, I'll just say the citric acid cycle. And during this cycle, you have a number of reactions that are going on here. The biggest thing that's happening during the citric acid cycle is that this, and there's things going on as it goes in here too. This is where you're going to make some carbon dioxide and some ATP, but not too much. Just a little bit. But all the six CO2 that we make in our reaction, that all gets made from here to here. So this is this carbon dioxide portion of cellular respiration. So now, that would be step 2. So first stage is glycolysis. Next is the citric acid cycle. And also during the citric acid cycle, you're making electron carriers as well. This is how we're going to make all our energy. So during this time, you're also making NADH. And there's another flavor of electron carriers as well. It's called FADH2. It's another parent that scooped up the kids, and it's going up a ladder as well. Their ladder is a little bit shorter than NADH's. That's it. That's all you need to know. Same thing. So you're going to make NADH and FADH2. So they react very similarly. So NADH and FADH2. All right. The third and final step is called oxidative phosphorylation. And so here, let me back up for a second. Glycolysis, you're in the cytosol. Citric acid cycle, you're in the matrix. Inside the inner membrane, this gooey part inside here. And now for oxidative phosphorylation, you are going to be functioning in the inner membrane. So that's all happening in the inner membrane. So this is step number 3, oxidative phosphorylation. It's a nice long word. And within this part, there's all these proteins in here. We're going to talk about all these proteins that are embedded within the inner membrane. But within oxidative phosphorylation, this is where all the good stuff happens. The electrons are going to get dropped off, and they're going to slide down the slide. And while they're sliding down the slide, they're going to make a ton of ATP. So NADH and FADH2, this is essentially the slide. They're going to drop their electrons off at the slide, and during this process, they are going to make tons of ATP. Oh my goodness, tons. This is when you can actually say we made energy. So tons of ATP get made here. The other thing that gets made here is water. So we're going to make lots of water. The 6 waters per glucose. We're going to do all of this stuff. This is amazing. So this is your big overview of cellular respiration. I'm hoping it makes a little bit of sense. We're going to put a little bit of flesh on this right now because it's very skeletal. Believe it or not, that's skeletal. So we're going to start with glycolysis. That's going to be nice and quick. And then we'll get to the citric acid cycle and then oxidative phosphorylation. This is when you're going to see the enzyme world kicking in. The enzymes are all over the place, but this is where it gets really important because there's one major enzyme we need to make all of that ATP. All right, so that's your preview of cellular respiration. Now, let's actually do some cellular respiration. Let's start with glycolysis. So this will be Roman numeral 2, cellular respiration, big A, glycolysis. Here we go. All right. Sorry, my pen is so loud. Here we go. So here are those individual steps we're going to talk about them now in a little bit more detail. But not glucose. I was thinking glucose. Glycolysis. All right, so So glycolysis is literally the breakdown of glucose into 2 molecules of pyruvate. You may also read somewhere that's pyruvic acid, pretty much the same thing. So glycolysis, whenever you see the word lysis, something is getting broken down. The breakdown of glucose into 2 molecules of pyruvate. All right, let's see what that looks like, shall we? So glucose, if you remember back from Unit 1, see how all of this is coming back together. You can't forget stuff in biology. It's always going to come back. So glucose, you have here's glucose. What happens with glucose? I'm not showing you all the details. There's a number of reactions that have to go from here to here. So this nice long arrow is actually going to represent many, 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 many reactions. The catabolic pathway. This is stage 1 in this whole catabolic pathway. But during this whole catabolic pathway, a couple of very important things are happening. What's happening is 2 molecules of ATP actually get used in this process. But during the course of all of these reactions, you end up making 4 ATP. So what I want you to know is that 2 molecules of ATP actually go in to this reaction, but overall 4 ATP get out. So you have a net gain of 2 ATP because 4 minus 2 is 2. So when we talk about a net gain, it's if you've worked a job and you've had taxes taken out, you have your gross pay, which is all the money you've worked for, and then there's taxes, so that gets subtracted. So you have a net pay. This is what you get to take home. So the take-home energy for this one would be 2 ATP. The other thing that happens during this whole glycolysis reaction is that 2 molecules of NAD plus go in, and as soon as those 2 molecules of NAD plus go in and they scoop up their electrons, they come out as 2 molecules of NADH. And they're also carrying 2 protons with them as well, because every time NAD plus becomes an NADH, there's always that extra proton in there. So that's just how it works. And then now, what glycolysis does, all these series of reactions are literally going to cut this glucose in half. It's going to take this 6-carbon ring and break it into 2 3-carbon chains. So you're keeping the carbon count the same, the oxygen count is going to be completely different. So here's what pyruvate looks like. It's going to be CCCH3. This is pyruvate, and you're going to get 2 of these. So basically this times 2. You're going to get 2 of those. That's the basic summary of glycolysis. It's good to be able to recognize the atomic structures behind all these and what's going on here. So 1 molecule of glucose through a series of reactions is going to become 2 molecules of pyruvate. 1 6-carbon chain becomes 2 3-carbon chains. They don't look the same anymore though, because throughout this whole process we've stripped away some hydrogens and their electrons, and NAD and NADH have now come into play. Throughout the process we made a little bit of energy. Nothing too major. So what I want you to know at the end of this whole entire thing, the overall yield, if you will, from glycolysis is that we're going to get 2 pyruvate, 2 NADH plus 2 H pluses, and 2 ATP. So the overall yield, meaning the stuff we make, the overall yield is 2 pyruvate, 2 NADHs, 2 protons and 2 ATP. That's important to remember. That's glycolysis. So 1 glucose gives all of that. So we need a little bit of energy, but that's not enough to live on. So next, we're going to stop here. We're going to pick up with citric acid cycle on when we get back together. So thank you. I will see you for some citric acid cycle.